March 2018, Eastern Syria. Radio static crackles through the darkness. Then a voice, desperate.
Echo 6, we are taking heavy fire.
Move up! Move up!
We need extraction now. Grid reference Foxtrot 2.
Are you seeing this? We can't fly into that! It's a death trap! We have to turn back!
Then, a woman's voice, calm, impossibly calm. Mark your position, Viper. I'm coming in. A Black Hawk helicopter tears through the Syrian night at near-zero altitude. Rotors screaming, hugging the terrain so close the skids nearly scrape the earth. Tracer rounds light up the darkness like angry fireflies. Explosions blossom in the distance. The pilot's hands are steady on the controls. Steady as a surgeon's, steady as stone. The co-pilot turns to her, eyes wide with fear. "Simone," they said. "I heard what they said." She banks hard. The helicopter groans. "And I'm going in anyway." The aircraft screams over the outer wall of a compound at 60 knots. Rotors inches from stone. Door gunners open up. Twin miniguns creating arcs of fire that rake the enemy positions. RPGs streak past the cockpit, close enough to feel the heat. Bullets ping off the armored hull like hail on a tin roof. 90 seconds. That's how long she held that helicopter in the middle of hell. 90 seconds in a kill zone, with 200 fighters trying to bring her down. 12 men were going to die in that compound. 12 men went home to their families. Because of her. But here's the thing. 6 hours before she flew into that hell. 6 hours before she saved 12 lives and earned a medal that would never be made public. A 23-year-old private at a security checkpoint laughed at her badge. Laughed. Called it a fake. Asked if she got it on Amazon. This is the story of Captain Simone Reaper Wells. Night Stalker pilot. The most decorated woman in Special Operations aviation history. And the lesson one young soldier learned about judging people by how they look. Before we go any further, if you're new here, this channel tells the hidden stories of warriors who never got their due. The ones the history books forgot. The ones still classified. Subscribe to this channel right now. And drop a comment with your location. Tell me where you're watching from. Wherever you are, check in. We're featuring comments from our community in our next video, so if you want to be part of that, comment right now. Hit subscribe. Hit the bell. Because stories like this one, they deserve to be told. Now, let's go back to the beginning. To understand who Captain Simone Wells is, you have to understand where she came from. And where she came from was a place where girls like her weren't supposed to dream this big. Simone Wells was born on March 15, 1987, in a two-bedroom apartment in Compton, California. Her mother, Denise, was 16 years old and working 2 jobs. Her father was a name on a birth certificate and not much else. She was raised by her grandmother, Evelyn Wells, a woman who had cleaned office buildings in downtown Los Angeles for 43 years, who had buried 2 sons to gang violence, and who believed with every fiber of her being that education was the only way out. "This world is going to look at you and see limitations," Evelyn told her granddaughter every single day. "Your job is to see possibilities." Simone was 7 years old when she first saw a helicopter up close. Her grandmother had saved for 6 months to take her to an air show in Long Beach. They packed sandwiches and juice boxes and took 3 buses to get there, arriving just as the morning fog was burning off. Simone had never seen anything like it. Fixed-wing aircraft doing loops and rolls. Vintage warplanes trailing smoke. Pilots in flight suits signing autographs for wide-eyed children. But it was the helicopters that captivated her. She stood frozen as a formation of Army Black Hawks swept across the field, moving in perfect synchronization, their rotors beating the air like the wings of giant mechanical dragonflies. They hovered and turned and danced in ways that seemed to defy physics, piloted by people who had somehow learned to make tons of metal fly. "That's what I want to do," she told her grandmother. "I want to fly those." Evelyn looked at the helicopters, then at her granddaughter, a small black girl from Compton, pointing at military aircraft and announcing her future as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Then you better start studying," Evelyn said. Because nothing worth doing comes easy, especially for girls who look like us. Simone studied. In a neighborhood where most kids dropped out by 10th grade, she was valedictorian. In a school with textbooks that were older than her mother, she taught herself calculus from library books. In a community where college was a dream that most people didn't bother having, she earned a full scholarship to Howard University. She joined ROTC on her first day of freshman year. The Army recruitment officer looked at her application and said, "So what do you want to do? Administration? Medical? We have great opportunities for women in support roles." "Aviation," Simone said. "I want to fly helicopters." The officer paused, cleared his throat. "That's a very competitive field. The washout rate is extremely high. Most candidates don't make it past." "I understand. What's the application process?" She graduated Howard in 3 years instead of 4. She finished flight school at the top of her class. And when she requested assignment to the most challenging, most dangerous helicopter unit in the entire U.S. military, the selection board almost denied her application. Not because she wasn't qualified, because they couldn't believe anyone who looked like her could be. She proved them wrong. The 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers, had never had a black female pilot. When Simone Wells arrived at Fort Campbell for selection, she was the first. And there were plenty of people who wanted her to be the last. The selection process for the Night Stalkers is considered one of the most demanding in the entire military. It's not just about flying skill, though you need that in abundance. It's about flying skill under the worst possible conditions. At night, in bad weather, into hostile territory, with people shooting at you, while lives hang in the balance. Most candidates wash out in the first 2 weeks. Simone didn't just pass. She excelled. But excellence wasn't enough to stop the whispers, the sideways glances, the instructors who graded her harder than everyone else because they were looking for any excuse to send her home, the fellow candidates who resented her presence and weren't shy about saying so. One night, during a particularly brutal training exercise, her helicopter took simulated fire that killed her co-pilot. Standard procedure was to abort the mission and return to base. Simone didn't abort. She flew the damaged aircraft alone with simulated hydraulic failure in zero visibility conditions to the extraction point, picked up the hostages, and flew them back to base with one hand on the stick and the other managing systems that were designed to require 2 people. When she landed, the lead instructor was waiting on the tarmac. He'd been one of the loudest voices arguing against her admission to the program. He didn't say anything for a long moment, just looked at her, then at the aircraft, then back at her. "Wells," he said finally, "that was either the stupidest or the bravest thing I've ever seen a candidate do." "Which one was it, sir?" He almost smiled. "Almost. I'll let you know when I figure it out." She graduated at the top of her class. First black woman to ever wear the Night Stalker patch. But she knew, they all knew, that graduating was just the beginning. Now she had to prove herself all over again. Every single day. On every single mission. So that's what she did. They called her Reaper. Not because she brought death, though she was certainly capable of that. They called her Reaper because of something that happened on her 9th combat mission. The details are still classified. What can be said is this. A 6-man reconnaissance team was trapped in a valley in Afghanistan, surrounded by enemy fighters, taking casualties, and running out of ammunition. 3 helicopters had already tried to extract them. 3 helicopters had been driven off by withering ground fire. The mission commander was about to call it, to declare the team unrecoverable and send in the bombers, when a voice came over the radio. "This is Captain Wells. I'm going in." "Negative, Wells. The LZ is too hot. We've lost 3 birds already." "With respect, sir, those teams have families. I'm going in." She did something that the aviation manuals say is impossible. She flew her Black Hawk through a canyon so narrow that her rotor tips were clearing the walls by inches. She came in below the enemy's angle of fire, using the terrain itself as cover. And she held that helicopter in a hover, in a space barely wider than her aircraft, while 6 wounded men were loaded aboard. When she lifted off, her crew chief counted 47 bullet holes in the fuselage. The team leader, a Delta Force Master Sergeant with 3 combat tours, found her after the debrief. He didn't say much, just shook her hand and said, "When my time comes, I want you flying the chariot." The call sign stuck. Reaper, the angel who came for you when death was the only other option. Over the next 5 years, she flew over 200 combat missions. She extracted operators from firefights in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and a dozen other places that officially never happened. She earned the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Silver Star, and the Bronze Star with Valor Device. She was recommended for the Medal of Honor twice for missions that remain classified to this day. And through all of it, she remained the same person she'd always been. Quiet, professional, unshakable. The woman who never raised her voice, never lost her composure, never let anyone see her sweat, even when checkpoint guards laughed at her badge. From a 2-bedroom apartment in Compton to the most elite helicopter unit in the United States military. From a little girl who took 3 buses to see an air show to a pilot who has saved more lives than she can count. And some kid at a checkpoint laughed at her badge. If you're watching this and you're not subscribed, you're missing stories like this every single day. This channel exists to tell the hidden tales of warriors who never get their due. Hit subscribe, hit the bell, and tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated? What did you do about it? Now, let's go back to Syria, to that kill zone, to those 90 seconds that changed everything. March 2018, Eastern Syria, Deir ez-Zor province. You heard the beginning. Now you'll understand why it mattered. A 12-man Delta Force team had been inserted 48 hours earlier to capture a high-value ISIS target. The intelligence said he was in a compound outside a small village. 30 fighters, maybe 40. A quick in and out. Surgical. The intelligence was wrong. There weren't 30 fighters. There weren't 40. There were over 200. And they were waiting. The ambush was sprung at 0300 hours. The team fought their way to a stone building near the center of the compound, the only defensible position in a sea of hostiles. They barricaded the doors. They rationed ammunition. They called for extraction. And they prayed. The team leader, Master Sergeant David Torres, had taken a round through his left shoulder in the initial assault. He was still giving orders, still directing fire with his good arm, still refusing to acknowledge that he was bleeding out. 2 other operators were down, one with a shattered femur, one with shrapnel wounds that had turned his left side into hamburger. The team medic was working miracles with limited supplies, but everyone knew the math. They had maybe an hour, maybe less. The call went out over encrypted channels. Emergency extraction. Priority 1. All available assets. But available assets was a problem. The nearest quick reaction force was 45 minutes out. Conventional helicopters would be torn apart before they got within a mile of the compound. Fighter jets could provide cover, but they couldn't land. There was one asset in range. A single Black Hawk, running a surveillance pattern 30 kilometers west. Captain Simone Wells was at the controls. She heard the call come in, heard the desperation in the voices, heard 12 men trying not to sound like they were saying goodbye. She didn't ask for permission, didn't wait for authorization, didn't calculate the odds. She just turned the helicopter toward the fire. Viper 6, this is Reaper. I'm 2 minutes out. Mark your position. Reaper, negative. Negative. LZ is too hot. You come in here, you'll get torn apart. We've got RPGs, heavy MG, at least 200 hostiles. It's a kill zone. Mark your position, Viper. I'm coming in. Her co-pilot, Warrant Officer Chun, looked at her like she'd lost her mind. Simone, they said. I heard what they said. And I'm going in anyway. You want out, say the word. I'll set down and you can wait here. Chun was quiet for a moment. Then he checked his instruments and said, just tell me what you need. I need you to trust me. She came in at near zero altitude, using the buildings for cover, threading through spaces that shouldn't have been navigable. The helicopter screamed over the outer wall of the compound at 60 knots, rotors inches from the stone, dropping into the courtyard like a hawk striking prey. The door gunners, Sergeants Martinez and Brooks, opened up before the skids hit dirt. Twin M134 miniguns spitting 4,000 rounds per minute each, creating a wall of fire that forced the enemy to keep their heads down. The moment they landed, everything went to hell. RPGs streaked across the courtyard. Bullets hammered the fuselage. An explosion rocked the aircraft so hard that Wells felt her teeth rattle. But she held it steady, held it rock solid while 12 men ran for their lives. Torres was the last one to the helicopter. He was being carried by 2 of his teammates, his shoulder wound still pumping blood. His face gray but his eyes still sharp. He looked at Wells through the cockpit window. She looked back. No words. None were needed. "Go!" someone screamed. "Go, go, go!" She pulled pitch. The Black Hawk leaped into the air, clawing for altitude, engines screaming at maximum power. An RPG passed so close to the tail rotor that the crew chief swore he could have reached out and touched it. And then, they were out, climbing, running, leaving the compound and its 200 fighters behind. 90 seconds. 90 seconds in a kill zone. 12 men went in. 12 men came out. Because one pilot decided that failure wasn't an option. The Black Hawk made it back to base with 37 bullet holes in its hull, a damaged tail rotor, and a hydraulic system that was bleeding fluid. The maintenance chief took one look at it and said, "This thing shouldn't have made it 10 miles, let alone 30. Wells didn't respond. She was already walking toward the medical tent where her passengers were being treated. Master Sergeant Torres was conscious when she found him. Barely. The docs had him hooked up to 2 IVs and were prepping him for surgery, but his eyes were open and tracking. When he saw her, he grabbed her arm. His grip was weak. He'd lost too much blood for anything else, but his eyes were fierce. "That was the most insane thing I've ever seen anyone do," he said. That was... He couldn't find the words. "My job," she said simply. "That was my job." "No." He shook his head, fighting the sedatives they'd given him. "That was more than that. That was... I have 3 kids, Captain. 3 kids who are gonna see their dad again because of you. I can't." "Then go home to them," she said. "That's all the thanks I need." She walked away before he could respond. The debrief took 4 hours. The paperwork took longer. By the time she was finished, the sun was coming up over the Syrian desert, and she'd been awake for 36 hours. But she didn't sleep. Not yet. She found a quiet spot behind one of the hangars, sat down on an empty fuel drum, and stared at her hands. They were shaking. Not much. Just a little tremor that wouldn't quite stop. She'd been flying combat missions for 5 years. She'd been shot at more times than she could count. She'd seen things that would give most people nightmares for the rest of their lives. But this one had been close. Too close. The odds had been wrong, and she'd known they were wrong, and she'd gone in anyway, because 12 men were going to die if she didn't. She sat there for a long time, watching her hands shake, waiting for them to stop. And when they finally did, she got up, walked to her quarters, and slept for 14 hours. She didn't do it for the recognition. She didn't do it for the medals. She did it because 12 men were going to die if she didn't act, and she was the only person who could save them. That was enough. Now let's go back to Fort Bragg. To that checkpoint. To Private Danny Morrison, who laughed at a badge he should have recognized. His day went from bad to catastrophic in the span of about 3 hours. By noon, his platoon sergeant had pulled him aside for a conversation that lasted 45 minutes and consisted mostly of creative ways to describe exactly how badly he had screwed up. By evening, he was standing at attention in front of Major Thomas Richardson, the base's operations officer, who was looking at him the way a scientist might look at a particularly disappointing lab specimen. "Do you know who Captain Wells is?" the major asked. Morrison shook his head miserably. "No, sir. I didn't." "Of course you didn't. Because if you did, you would have saluted, thanked her for her service, and gotten the hell out of her way." The major leaned back in his chair. "Captain Simone Wells has the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Silver Star, the Bronze Star with Valor Device, 3 Army Commendation Medals. She's been recommended for the Medal of Honor twice, for missions that don't officially exist. He let that sink in. She's flown more combat missions than any other pilot currently serving in the 160th. She's extracted more special operators from more impossible situations than anyone I've ever met. And she did all of it while being told, over and over again by people like you, that she didn't belong. Morrison felt sick. I didn't know, sir. That's the problem, Private. You didn't know. You looked at a black woman in civilian clothes and you assumed she didn't belong on a military base. You didn't ask questions. You didn't verify credentials. You just laughed. The major stood up. Your career should be over right now. You understand that? Disrespecting a superior officer. Interfering with a time-sensitive operation. Creating a security incident at a checkpoint. Any one of those is enough to end you. Morrison felt his future crumbling. But it's not going to be. You know why? Morrison shook his head. Because Captain Wells called me 2 hours ago. She specifically requested that no disciplinary action be taken against you. The words didn't compute. Morrison stared at the major, unable to process what he was hearing. She said, and I'm quoting here, I didn't become who I am by destroying people who underestimated me. I became who I am by proving them wrong. Give him a chance to learn better. The major walked to the door. So here's what's going to happen. You're being transferred to a support role for SOAR aviation training. For the next 6 months, you're going to watch pilots like Captain Wells fly. You're going to learn what they do. You're going to understand what it takes to earn that badge you laughed at. He paused at the door. And maybe by the time you're done, you'll think twice before judging someone by how they look. That woman saved 12 lives in Syria last year. And she just saved your career. Try to be worth it. 2 years later, Sergeant Danny Morrison, no longer a private, thanks to hard work and a genuine transformation in character, was assigned to a training exercise at Fort Campbell. He was helping coordinate ground logistics for a SOAR night flight demonstration when he saw a familiar figure walking across the tarmac. Flight suit, helmet under her arm, moving with that same unhurried confidence he remembered from the worst day of his life. Captain Wells. He could have stayed where he was. Could have pretended he didn't see her. Could have avoided what was certain to be an awkward conversation. Instead, he walked straight toward her. Captain Wells. She turned, looked at him. Recognition flickered in her eyes. Not immediately, but after a moment. The checkpoint, the badge, the helicopter. Sergeant Morrison. Her voice was neutral, professional. He stood at attention. Ma'am, I owe you an apology. What I did at that checkpoint 2 years ago was disrespectful and unprofessional. It was wrong. And I've spent the last 2 years trying to be better. He paused. I wanted you to know that it worked. What you did, giving me a second chance instead of ending my career, it worked. I'm a different person now. And I wanted to thank you for that. She looked at him for a long moment. The same calm, evaluating gaze that had faced down 200 ISIS fighters without flinching. Then something in her expression softened. You know what my grandmother used to tell me? She said. She said, people will always judge you by how you look. Let them. And then show them how wrong they were. She extended her hand. I didn't save your career because I wanted you to be grateful. I saved it because I saw something in that checkpoint that you didn't see yet. Morrison frowned. What's that, ma'am? Potential. Underneath the assumptions and the arrogance, I saw someone who could learn. Someone who could grow. Someone who could become better. She shook his hand firmly. Looks like I was right. She turned and walked toward her aircraft. A minute later, the rotors began to spin, and the Black Hawk lifted off into the evening sky. Sergeant Morrison watched it go, and for the first time he truly understood. The helicopter that day at Fort Bragg hadn't come to punish him. It had come to pick up one of the most elite pilots in American military history. He had just been standing in the way. Captain Simone Reaper Wells is still flying, still saving lives, still proving people wrong every single day. Most people will never know her name. Most people will never know what she's done. She'll walk into rooms and be underestimated over and over again. And she doesn't care, because she knows what she's worth. And so do the operators who are alive because of her. If the story moved you, share it. Not for me, for her. For all the warriors who look like her, who came from where she came from, who were told they couldn't and did it anyway. Subscribe to this channel. Hit the notification bell. And drop your location in the comments. Compton, California. Howard University. Fort Campbell. Fort Bragg. Wherever you are, let me know. Night Stalkers don't quit. And neither do we. See you in the next one.